I used to think the worst part of delivering pizzas at 2 a.m. was the lack of tips, but last Tuesday made me realize how lucky I'd been. It was raining hard when the final order came through our app. The receipt just listed an address on Old Mill Road, a dead-end street backed up against the country woods. With a note in the delivery instructions, "Bring to the back porch. Front door is broken." I didn't want to take it, but my manager looked exhausted and promised I could clock out right after. The drive out there took 20 minutes. The houses grew further apart until my headlights finally caught the mailbox of the target property. The place was completely dark. No porch lights. No movement inside. Just a rusted sedan sitting in the driveway with its driver's side door cracked slightly open. I grabbed the thermal bag, stepped out into the pouring rain, and walked up the gravel driveway. The squelch of my sneakers felt deafening loud. I walked past the dark sedan, noticing the interior light wasn't on, meaning the battery was completely dead. It looked like it had been sitting there a long time. Following the instructions, I walked around the side of the house toward the back. The mud clung to my shoes, making every step a struggle. When I rounded the corner, I saw the back porch. A single, bare bulb was flickering violently above the screened-in door. I knocked on the wooden frame. "Delivery," I called out, my voice sounding thin against the rain. No answer. I waited 30 seconds, getting soaked before knocking harder. "Pizza delivery. Anyone here?" A floorboard creaked inside the dark kitchen. A man's voice, flat and entirely devoid of emotion, came from right behind the screen door. He was standing in the pitch black, completely invisible to me. "Leave it on the table," the voice said. "I need a signature for the credit card, sir," I replied, wiping rain from my eyes. "Or cash if it wasn't paid online." There was a long pause. The silhouette of the head seemed to press slightly closer to the mesh screen. "I left the cash in the front seat of the car in the driveway. Go get it. Leave the food here." Something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. It wasn't angry. It was mechanical, like he was reading a script. "You know what, man? It's fine," I said, backing up a step. "Company policy says I can't do that. I'll just bring it back to the shop." "Go to the car," the voice repeated, slightly louder this time. "The money is in the car." I didn't answer. I turned around and started walking back toward the front of the house. I didn't run, purely out of fear that it would trigger him to chase me. As I rounded the side of the house, I looked over at the rusted sedan in the driveway. With the angle of my high beams from my own car shining across the yard, I could finally see inside the open door of the sedan. There was no money on the front seat. Instead, a heavy roll of duct tape, a pair of industrial zip ties, and a massive rusted crowbar were laid out neatly on the passenger side. Panic completely took over. I dropped the pizza bag in the mud and bolted for my driver's side door. I threw my car into reverse, tires screeching on the gravel, and tore out of the driveway. As I swung the car around to face the main road, my headlights swept across the front porch of the dark house. The front door wasn't broken. It was wide open, and standing right there in the doorway was a man holding a phone to his ear, staring directly at me, completely motionless. I called the police on my drive back, but by the time they arrived, the house was entirely empty. The owners were away on vacation in Florida. The police told me the rusted sedan didn't belong to the homeowners. It had been reported stolen 3 days prior. I quit my delivery job the next morning. But what keeps me awake at night isn't the memory of that dark house or the tools in the car. It's the realization that while I was arguing with the man behind the screen door, my phone never rang. The guy on the front porch wasn't calling me. He was listening to the person inside the house. And whoever dialed the delivery app in the first place had to use a real phone number, which means he still has my contact info and knows exactly who I am. I've driven the stretch of I-90 through South Dakota dozens of times, but 3 years ago, a blown alternator forced me off the highway in a town that didn't even have a population sign. It was almost midnight when my car finally sputtered out, coasting onto the gravel lot of a place called the Crestview Motel. It was one of those old single-story motel inns from the 1960s where every door faces the parking lot. The neon vacancy sign buzzed with a sick green hum, casting long shadows across the empty property. Aside from a beat-up pickup truck parked near the office, my car was the only one there. I stepped into the office, the smell of stale cigarettes hitting me instantly. An older guy with yellowing teeth looked up from a tiny, static-filled television. I explained my car situation and asked for a room for the night until a mechanic could look at it in the morning. He didn't say a word, just slid a heavy brass key across the counter. Room 14. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Faded floral blankets, a faint smell of bleach, and a window looking right back in the dark gravel lot. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the bed without even changing out of my clothes. I must have slept for a couple of hours before a strange, rhythmic sound woke me up. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps walking on gravel, moving very slowly. I sat up in bed, the room completely black except for the green neon light bleeding through the thin curtains. I crept over to the window and peeled back the edge of the fabric. A man was standing in the middle of the parking lot. He was wearing a heavy winter coat despite the summer heat, and he was just staring directly at my room. He wasn't moving, just standing there, bathed in the green neon light. I checked my phone. 1% battery left. I quickly plugged it in the wall outlet, but the screen didn't light up. The outlet was dead. I tried the light switch next to the bed. Nothing. The power in the room had been cut. Suddenly, the footsteps started again. They were louder now, heading straight for my door. The footsteps ceased right outside room 14. I froze, holding my breath in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs. A second later, the brass doorknob began to slowly turn. It clicked against the deadbolt, which was the only thing keeping it closed. When the lock held, the turning stopped. I expected a frantic pounding or a shoulder against the wood. Instead, there was just silence. Then a soft metallic scraping sound began at the bottom of the door. I dropped to my knees and looked through the half-inch gap between the bottom of the door and the concrete threshold. In the dim green light, I could see a thin, flexible wire being slid beneath the door. Attached to the end of it was a tiny, glowing lens, a fiber optic inspection camera. The wire began to snake upward, tilting toward the interior lock. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to break the door down. They were actively and quietly bypassing the deadbolt. Panic cleared my throat, and I yelled, "Hey, I'm armed! Get the hell away from the door!" The wire instantly snapped back under the door and vanished. I heard the frantic sprint of heavy boots across the gravel, followed by the roaring engine of a pickup truck tearing out of the parking lot. I didn't sleep a wink. I stood by the window with a heavy ceramic lamp in my hands until the sun came up. At 6 a.m., I marched to the front office to demand answers from the manager. The office door was unlocked, but the room was completely stripped. The TV was gone, the keys were gone, and sitting on the counter was a printed logbook of the motel's guests. Out of curiosity, I flipped through the pages. The motel hadn't registered a legitimate guest since 2018, but when I looked at the very last line of the log, written in fresh black ink, my blood turned to ice. It listed my exact car make, my license plate number, and the words, Room 14, Solo Traveler, no phone signal. The old man wasn't a manager. He didn't own the motel. He was just waiting there for someone to break down. I took a job as a night shift security guard at a sprawling corporate office complex just outside Chicago to pay my way through college. It was supposed to be easy money, mostly just sitting in a lobby monitoring cameras, walking empty hallways and locking doors. The complex consisted of 3 identical 4-story buildings connected by glass skywalks. At night, the entire place was a ghost town of empty cubicles, dark windows, and echoing linoleum floors. It was around 3:15 a.m. on a bitter Tuesday in November when I noticed something weird on monitor 4, which fed the camera for the basement maintenance tunnels of Building B. The motion-activated floodlight in the main corridor had been kicked on. I zoomed in on the feed, but the hallway was completely empty. I figured a stray mouse or a shifting steam pipe had triggered the sensor, so I logged it as a false alarm and went back to studying. Exactly 20 minutes later, the motion light on the first floor elevator lobby of Building B turned on. I sat up, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The basement tunnel connected directly to the elevator shaft. I pulled up the camera feed for elevator car 2. It was sitting idle on the first floor, but the digital display on the wall outside was actively blinking. Someone was repeatedly pressing the call button. Control to Building B. Anyone down there? I said on my radio, knowing damn well I was the only guard on duty. Silence answered, just a hiss of static. I grabbed my heavy Maglite flashlight and walked across the glass skywalk from the main building to Building B. The transition from the warm, brightly lit lobby to the pitch-black, freezing corporate floor felt like stepping into an icebox. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the HVAC system. I reached the first floor elevator lobby. The motion light had already clicked off, plunging the area into darkness. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the floor. Nothing. The elevator door was closed. I reached out and pressed the call button myself to see if it was malfunctioning. The door smoothly slid open. The interior of the elevator was completely empty. But as I stepped closer to inspect the buttons, I noticed a strong, pungent smell. It smelled like damp earth, rotting leaves, and sour sweat. Then I looked down at the floor of the elevator. Leading from the back corner of the metal car, trailing out into the carpeted lobby floor, were distinct wet footprints. They were shoe prints. They were the marks of bare feet, wide, flat, and tracking mud everywhere. My heart began to hammer violently against my ribs. Someone was in the building, and they weren't wearing shoes in freezing November weather. I raised my radio. This is security. If anyone is in Building B, you are trespassing. Show yourself. A burst of static erupted from my radio, but mixed into the static, very faintly, I heard a voice. It wasn't over the radio channel. It was coming from the dark office space right behind me. Trespassing, a voice whispered, perfectly mimicking my exact cadence and tone. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the maze of dark cubicles. The beam caught a flash of pale movement disappearing behind a row of filing cabinets. "I'm calling the police," I shouted, my voice cracking with genuine panic. I backed into the elevator, desperately slamming the closed door button. As the metal doors began to slide together, a face peered out from around the edge of a filing cabinet. It was a man. His hair was matted with dirt, his clothes were torn, and his eyes were wide, glassy, and completely unblinking. But what made my blood run cold was his mouth. He was stretching his lips into a wide, unnatural grin, and his jaw was moving silently up and down, matching the rhythm of my own panicked breathing. He wasn't aggressive. He was studying me. The elevator doors finally slammed shut, and I took it straight up to the 4th floor, sprinted across the skywalk back to the main building, and locked myself in the security hub until police arrived. The cops searched Building B with canine units. They found where the man had entered, a broken ventilation grate in the basement maintenance tunnel. They also found a small cove tucked behind the building's main water mains. He had built a small nest out of stolen employee jackets, discarded fast food wrappers, and dozens of printouts. When the detective called me into the office the next day, his face was dead serious. He handed me a stack of papers they recovered from the man's nest. They weren't random corporate documents. They were photocopies of my own security shift logs dating back 3 months. Every time I had logged a false alarm or glitch in the cameras, there was a handwritten note next to it in messy black ink. The notes read things like, "He didn't look at monitor 4. He went to the bathroom at 2:10. He watches the main doors, never the vents. The intruder was never caught." The police believe he was a transient with severe psychological issues who had been living inside the walls of the complex for nearly half a year. I quit that security job immediately. But what keeps me awake at night is knowing that he didn't just hide from me. He watched me. He learned my schedule, my habits, and my blind spots. And even though that office building is miles away, every time I'm home alone at night and hear a floorboard creak, I can't help but wonder if he finally figured out my home routine too.